The girl was stuffed inside a cryo crate meant for livestock, and she was still breathing. I found her on the worst night of a bad year, in a docking bay that smelled like engine grease and burnt wiring, Corvan Station, the kind of place where nobody asked questions, because the answers were always ugly. I had taken a subcontract to haul 16 sealed cargo units from the station to a buyer on Threshold Colony. Simple work, no questions. Good pay, the kind of job I had been doing for 3 years since I walked away from colonial security and decided that keeping my head down was the closest thing to a life plan I could manage. I was running pre-flight checks on my ship, a battered cargo hauler called the Burnt Hand, when I heard it. A scratching sound, faint and rhythmic, coming from inside Crate 11. At first I thought it was a coolant leak, or maybe a rodent that had crawled in during loading. But then the scratching stopped, and something else took its place. A whimper. Small, desperate. The kind of sound that comes from a living thing that has been scared for so long it has forgotten how to scream. I should have walked away. That was the smart move. Sealed cargo meant sealed cargo, and in places like Corvan, curiosity was a quick way to end up floating in vacuum. But I have never been smart. Not once in my entire life. I popped the seal on Crate 11, and the lid hissed open. She was curled at the bottom of the container, knees pulled to her chest, arms wrapped around herself so tightly that her fingers had gone white. Her skin was pale violet, almost lavender, and it shimmered faintly under the cargo bay lights like something alive was moving beneath the surface. Her eyes were enormous, silver, with no visible pupil, just wide discs of liquid mercury that caught the light and threw it back at me. She looked like a child, maybe 6 years old by human standards, maybe younger. It was hard to tell because she was not human. She was Velari. I had never seen one in person. Almost nobody had. The Velari were one of the oldest civilizations in the galaxy. They kept to their shielded homeworld, rarely interacted with outsiders, and when they did appear on diplomatic feeds, they looked like something out of a painting. Tall, elegant, untouchable. But this one was small and broken, and had sedation patches stuck to the side of her neck, half peeled, as though she had been clawing at them in her sleep. The moment she saw me, her eyes went wide with a terror so pure it made my stomach drop. She scrambled backward in the crate, pressing herself against the far wall, her mouth open but no sound coming out. Bioluminescent streaks ran down her cheeks like tear tracks, glowing faintly blue in the dim light. I held up my hands, slowly, palms open, the universal sign of, I am not going to hurt you, though I had no idea if her species read it the same way. Easy, I said. Easy. I am not going to touch you. You are safe. She did not understand the words. I could see that. But something in my voice, or maybe something in my face, made her stop retreating. She stared at me with those silver eyes, chest heaving, tears still glowing on her cheeks. Then she did something I was not prepared for. She reached out and grabbed my hand. Her fingers were tiny, 6 of them on each hand, impossibly delicate, like they had been carved from glass. She held on so tight it hurt, and she would not let go. I could feel her shaking through the contact, a tremor that ran from her fingertips all the way up to her shoulder. She was cold, starving, terrified, and she was holding on to me like I was the only solid thing left in the universe. That was when the cargo bay door opened behind me. 3 men walked in. 2 of them were carrying sidearms in belt holsters, the casual kind of carry, that said they were used to the weight. The third was bigger, older, with a shaved head and a scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw. He was smiling. It was not a friendly smile. Morrow, the scarred man said. You are early. His name was Gregor Fell. I had met him once, briefly, when the subcontract was arranged. He ran cargo for one of the syndicate outfits that operated in the outer territories. Weapons, stims, biological samples, whatever paid. He looked at the open crate. He looked at the girl clinging to my hand. His smile did not change. Put her back, he said. Seal the crate. Forget what you saw. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a credit chip. There is a bonus in it for you. Enough to upgrade that rattling engine you have been nursing for 2 years. I looked at the chip. I looked at the girl. She was staring up at me, And even though she could not understand a word of what was being said, she understood everything. I could see it in her eyes. She knew what the men wanted. She knew what the crate was. She knew that the next few seconds would decide whether she went back into the dark. I have made a lot of bad decisions in my life. Walked away from a career, burned bridges with people who cared about me, spent too many nights at the bottom of a bottle feeling sorry for myself. But in that moment, looking down at that child, I made the first good decision I had made in years. I said no. Fell's smile disappeared. That was not a request. I heard you the first time. The two armed men moved. One reached for his sidearm. The other stepped to the right, trying to flank me. Fell stayed where he was, eyes flat, calculating. He had done this before. He had handled difficult subcontractors and stubborn haulers and anyone else who got between him and a payday. He was not worried. He should have been. I shoved Athos behind the nearest cargo stack with one arm and grabbed the fire suppression lever on the wall with the other. The system was old, mechanical, the kind of failsafe that stations like Corvon never bothered to upgrade. I yanked it, and the bay exploded with white chemical foam. It was not dangerous, but it was blinding. The two armed men cursed and stumbled. One of them fired a shot that punched into the ceiling and sent sparks raining down. I hit the first one before he could clear his eyes. My fist connected with his throat, and he went down choking, his weapon clattering across the floor. The second one got his gun up, but I was already inside his reach. I drove my knee into his stomach, grabbed his gun hand, and twisted until something snapped. He screamed, and I took the weapon from him and threw it into the open crate. Fell came through the foam like a freight train. He was fast for a big man, and he had a knife. The blade caught me across the left forearm, opening a gash that bled immediately, hot and wet. I grabbed his wrist with my injured hand and pulled him off balance, then hit the emergency controls for the cargo loader arm mounted on the ceiling rail. The mechanical arm swung down and caught Fell across the back, sending him sprawling. I hit the zero-gravity toggle on the bay panel, and everything that was not bolted down, including Fell and his two men, floated upward in a tangle of limbs and foam. I grabbed the girl. She was light, almost weightless even in normal gravity, and she wrapped her arms around my neck without hesitation. I ran for the burnt hand, slapped the hull release, and carried her up the boarding ramp. Behind me, I could hear Fell shouting, could hear the thud of bodies hitting the floor as the gravity restored. I sealed the docking clamps, fired the engines before they were fully warmed, and launched out of Bay 14 hard enough to press us both into the pilot's seat. The station fell away behind us. Warning lights flashed across my console. Unauthorized departure. Docking fees unpaid. Security alert. I ignored all of it and pushed the throttle to full burn. My arm was bleeding badly. I had at least one broken rib from where Fell had landed, a hit I barely remembered taking. The girl was still clinging to me, her face pressed against my chest, her whole body shaking. I put one hand on the back of her head and held her there, flying one-handed, bleeding onto the console. We cleared the station's sensor range after 12 minutes. I cut the main engines and let the burnt hand coast on momentum while I caught my breath. The shaking in my hands was not from the fight, it was from the aftermath. The realization of what I had just done. I had stolen cargo from a syndicate crew. I had assaulted 3 men. I had taken a child that someone powerful clearly wanted. And I had no idea who she was, where she came from, or why she had been locked in a livestock crate. I looked down at her. She lifted her face from my chest and looked up at me. Her bioluminescent tear tracks had faded to a soft glow. Her silver eyes searched my face for something. Trust, maybe, or the absence of cruelty. Whatever she found, it was enough, because some of the tension left her small body, and she exhaled a shaky breath. Then she spoke, one word, in broken galactic common, barely above a whisper. More coming. I stared at her. The words were clear enough, even through her accent. More coming. Not more men, not more ships, just more. Like she had been running for so long that the threat had stopped being specific and become a constant. A weather pattern, a tide. I tightened my arm around her and turned back to the console. My nav computer showed open space ahead, and nothing behind us. Yet, I set a course for the deepest, darkest stretch of void I could find, and pushed the burnt hand to its limit. The girl pressed her face back into my chest, and I could feel her heartbeat against my ribs. It was faster than a human pulse, lighter, like a bird trapped behind glass. I did not know her name. I did not know what she was. I did not know that the blood dripping from my forearm had just triggered a bond older than most civilizations in the galaxy. I did not know that by fighting for her, by bleeding for her, I had become something I could not undo. All I knew was that someone had put a child in a box, and I was never going to let them put her back. I spent the first hour in open space, trying not to bleed out on my own dashboard. The cut on my forearm was deeper than I had thought. Fell's knife had gone through the muscle and nicked something important, because every time I flexed my hand, blood pulsed out in a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. I dug a med kit from under the pilot seat with my good hand and clamped a pressure bandage over the wound, hissing through my teeth at the sting. The broken rib was worse in some ways, because there was nothing I could do about it except breathe shallow and hope it had not punctured anything. The girl watched me the entire time. She sat in the co-pilot seat, which was way too big for her, with her knees pulled up and her arms wrapped around them. Her silver eyes tracked every movement I made, with an intensity that was almost unsettling. She did not cry. She did not speak. She just watched, like she was memorizing me, cataloging every detail, in case she needed to run again, and wanted to remember the face of the one person who had not tried to put her in a box. "You hungry?" I asked. I mimed eating, bringing my hand to my mouth. She tilted her head but did not respond. I pulled out a standard ration bar from the emergency supplies and held it out to her. She looked at it, sniffed it once, and turned away. I tried water next, pouring a cup from the filtration system. She took it with both hands, sipped carefully, and drank the whole thing in small, measured gulps. Then she held the cup out for more. I refilled it 3 times before she was satisfied. With the immediate crisis handled, I turned to the question that was eating at me. Who was she? The Velari were not the kind of species that showed up in syndicate cargo crates. They were isolationists, famously so. Their homeworld, Velara, was protected by a defense grid that could shred entire fleets. They had ambassadors on the Galactic Council, but those ambassadors were rarely seen and never accessible. The idea of a Velari child being smuggled through the outer territories was like finding a diamond in a sewage pipe. It did not happen unless something had gone very wrong somewhere. I accessed the ship's data terminal and ran a search on the Velari. What came back was mostly public knowledge, diplomatic profiles, species biology, cultural notes. But buried in the results, cached from FringeNet sources that the main databases had not scrubbed yet, I found something that made the blood drain from my face. The Velari Empire had gone dark 8 months ago. No communications in or out. No diplomatic signals. No trade vessels. The Galactic Council had issued a statement calling it an internal restructuring, which was diplomatic language for we do not know what happened, and we are too nervous to investigate. But the FringeNet told a different story. Unverified reports from traders and smugglers who worked the borders of Velari space described military vessels with altered insignia patrolling the perimeter. Transmissions intercepted and decoded by independent cryptographers contained fragments of what sounded like loyalty oaths to a new government. The ruling consensus on the fringe was simple and ugly. A coup. The imperial bloodline had been overthrown, and based on the scattered reports, the imperial family had been killed. I turned in my seat and looked at the girl. She was holding the empty water cup in both hands, staring at nothing. Around her neck, half hidden beneath the torn collar of her clothing, hung a pendant. Crystalline, about the size of my thumb, with facets that caught the cabin light and broke it into pale violet fragments. It pulsed faintly, a soft rhythm like a heartbeat, and the light it produced matched the bioluminescent glow on her cheeks exactly. I pulled up the Velari diplomatic profile and scrolled to the section on imperial iconography. The crest of the ruling bloodline was displayed in a high-resolution image, a crystalline sigil with geometric facets arranged in a specific pattern. It was identical to the pendant around her neck. My hands went cold. I was sitting in a broken cargo ship in the middle of nowhere with a broken rib and a bleeding arm. and the child in my co-pilot seat was the heir to one of the oldest empires in the galaxy, the last surviving member of a royal bloodline that someone had just murdered to seize power. And the people who had put her in that crate were not random smugglers. They were working for whoever had taken the throne. I closed the terminal and sat there for a long time, staring at the dark space ahead of us through the viewport. She was worth more than everything I had ever owned, earned, or stolen combined. To the coup leaders, she was a loose end that needed to be tied off. To the loyalists, if any existed, she was a symbol, a rallying point, a living claim to the throne. To the Galactic Council, she was a diplomatic crisis waiting to happen. And to the Syndicate, she was just cargo. A delivery that someone was paying very well to receive. I looked at her again. She looked back at me. Her skin had shifted color in the time since we had left the station. On Corvan, she had been dark indigo, almost bruise-colored. Now she was lighter, closer to lilac, and the trembling had mostly stopped. I did not know what the color change meant, but I could guess. Dark meant afraid. Light meant less afraid. She was less afraid because of me. Because I was here. Because I had fought for her. That realization settled in my chest like a weight I was not ready to carry. A proximity alarm screamed across the console and shattered the silence. I lunged for the sensor display. 2 contacts had dropped out of faster-than-light travel behind us, less than 40,000 kilometers away and closing fast. They were not Syndicate vessels. The signatures were clean, military-grade, with power outputs that dwarfed anything the Syndicate could field. I pulled up their transponder data and felt my stomach drop. Velari warships, running dark insignia, no identification broadcast, no diplomatic hailing frequency. They were ghosts, and they were hunting. The comm panel lit up with an incoming transmission. I opened the channel. The voice that came through was calm, precise, and colder than vacuum. It spoke Galactic Common, with the clipped efficiency of someone who considered the language beneath them. Unidentified cargo vessel. You are carrying property of the Velari Transitional Authority. Power down your engines and prepare for boarding. The asset will be transferred to our custody. Compliance will be rewarded. Resistance will not. Property, asset. They were talking about a child, a little girl who could not weigh more than 20 kilograms, and who was clutching an empty water cup with both hands. I closed the channel without responding, and hit the thrust controls. The burnt hand was not built for combat. It was not built for speed. It was a cargo hauler, 20 years old, with patched hull plates and an engine that made a sound like grinding teeth when pushed past 70%. But it was mine, and I knew every rattle, every weakness, every trick it could perform that its designers never intended. The asteroid belt ahead of us was dense. The Corvan system was littered with debris from a planetary collision that had happened millions of years ago, and the belt was a tangled maze of tumbling rock, some pieces the size of houses, others the size of cities. It was navigation suicide for any ship running standard approach vectors. But the burnt hand was small, and I was desperate, and desperate is its own kind of genius. I dove into the belt at full speed. The warships followed. They were faster and more agile than a cargo hauler had any right to compete with, but they were also bigger, and size matters when you are threading between spinning mountains of rock at several hundred meters per second. I pulled the burnt hand through gaps that made my collision alarms scream. I skimmed so close to a tumbling asteroid that its surface scraped paint off my starboard hull. I killed the engines and used momentum to drift through a narrow channel, then fired the lateral thrusters to bounce off a rock face and change direction entirely. The warships fired. Energy bolts slammed into the asteroids around me, shattering rock and sending shrapnel pinging off my shields. A direct hit to my rear quarter dropped my shield integrity to 40% and sent sparks showering from an overhead panel. The girl cried out, the first real sound she had made since her whispered warning, and pressed herself deeper into the seat. I dumped cargo pods behind me. 6 of them, ejected in a spread pattern, each one tumbling through the belt like a decoy. The warship's targeting systems locked onto the pods for 3 precious seconds before recognizing them as empty. 3 seconds was all I needed. I dove behind a massive asteroid fragment, cut my engines to 0, and powered down everything except life support and passive sensors. The warships swept past, their active scanners pinged off the asteroid above us and bounced away. I held my breath. The girl held hers. For 30 seconds, we sat in the dark, silent, invisible, while two warships, designed to subjugate entire systems, hunted for us in a field of spinning rock. Then something happened that I did not expect. The girl leaned forward and placed both of her small hands flat on the console. Her pendant flared. The bioluminescent lines on her face and hands blazed bright, and I felt something surge through the ship, a pulse that was not electrical and not mechanical, but something older and stranger than either. My shield display jumped from 40% to 92%. The engine diagnostics cleared 3 warning codes simultaneously. The sensor array sharpened to a resolution I had never seen before. She was doing something, channeling something through the ship, some kind of bioenergy that the Velari possessed, the same force that powered their legendary defense grid, and she was feeding it into my battered hauler like a transfusion. I did not question it. I fired the engines and launched from behind the asteroid at a speed the burnt hand had never reached. The warships detected us, wheeled to pursue, but I was already threading the last edge of the belt, heading for open space, with enough velocity to engage the faster-than-light drive. The moment we cleared the debris field, I punched the drive, and the stars stretched into lines, and the warships vanished behind a wall of bent light. We came out of the jump, 12 light-years away, in an empty stretch of void between two systems. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely release the controls. The girl sat back in her seat, her glow fading, her eyes half closed. Whatever she had done, it had cost her. She looked exhausted, drained, like the effort had pulled something vital out of her. I checked the sensors. Nothing behind us, nothing ahead. We were alone. My ship was in bad shape. The hull had taken microfractures from the debris impacts. The rear shield generator was fried. Life support was running on backup power, which gave us maybe 18 hours before things got uncomfortable. I needed repairs. I needed supplies. I needed a plan. But first, I needed to understand what I was dealing with. I turned to the girl. She opened her eyes and looked at me. For a long moment, we just stared at each other, two survivors of something that should have killed us both, separated by species and language and everything else that was supposed to matter. Then she spoke, quietly, carefully, shaping each syllable like it was fragile. Aethys. I blinked. Is that your name? She touched her chest with one small hand. Aethys. Something cracked inside my chest. Not the broken rib. Something softer. Cade, I said, touching my own chest. My name is Cade. She tried it. Her mouth worked around the unfamiliar sound. Cade. It was close enough. I did not correct her. She did not need correction. She needed someone to tell her that she was going to be okay, and even though I was not sure it was true, I said it anyway. You are safe, Aethys. I am going to keep you safe. She did not understand the words, but she understood the tone. Her skin shifted from lilac to a soft, almost luminous shade of pale violet, and the trembling in her hands stopped. She reached out and wrapped her fingers around mine, 6 tiny fingers holding on, with a strength that had nothing to do with muscle. I held on back and started plotting a course for the nearest neutral station, somewhere with medical supplies and repair facilities and no syndicate connections, somewhere we could breathe. Behind us, in the vast dark between the stars, 2 warships were regrouping. Ahead of us, an empire's worth of enemies was looking for a little girl with silver eyes, and in between, sitting in a damaged ship with failing life support and a broken rib, was me, a washed-up cargo hauler with no plan, no allies, and no reason to believe I could keep this child alive for more than a week. But she was holding my hand, and that was enough to keep me moving. Palak's refuge sat in the shadow of a dead moon, a sprawling medical station built from salvaged hull plating and repurposed habitat modules. It was run by the Mending Order, a multi-species humanitarian organization that treated anyone who showed up at their docks regardless of affiliation, species, or ability to pay. Smugglers knew it, pirates knew it. Even the syndicate had an unspoken agreement to leave Palak's alone, because everyone needed a place to go when things went wrong. I docked the burnt hand with less than 4 hours of life support remaining. The hull groaned as the clamps engaged, a sound that told me the ship was one hard turn away from structural failure. I carried Athos down the boarding ramp because she refused to walk, not because she could not, but because she would not let go of me. Her arms were locked around my neck, her face pressed against my shoulder, and every time I tried to set her down, her grip tightened, and a soft keening sound escaped her throat. So I carried her. Through the docking corridor, past the intake desk, into the medical wing, with blood from my arm wound soaking through the bandage and dripping onto the floor behind us. The intake coordinator, a four-armed Brellian with reading glasses perched on the bridge of a flat nose, looked at us and immediately called for a trauma team. Within minutes, I was sitting on an examination table with a Velari child in my lap and 3 medical professionals trying to work around her. That was when I met Sorvan. He was a Dreth, which meant he stood nearly 2 meters tall with rough, bark-textured skin and deep-set eyes that glowed faintly amber. He moved slowly, deliberately, the way old doctors do when they have seen enough emergencies to know that panic helps nobody. He looked at me. He looked at Ethos. He looked at the pendant around her neck. And then he cleared the room. "Everyone out," he said. His voice was deep, calm, and carried the weight of someone who was used to being obeyed. The nurses left, the intake coordinator left, the door sealed behind them. Sorvan pulled a stool close to us and sat down. He did not reach for Athos. He did not try to examine her. He just sat there, hands folded in his lap, and waited. "She will not let anyone touch her," I said. "I have tried. I can see that." He studied the girl with those amber eyes. "How long has she been with you?" 16 hours, maybe 18. I found her in a cargo crate on Corvan Station. Something shifted behind Sorvan's expression. A tightening. A recognition that he was trying to hide. A cargo crate. Sealed for livestock transport. Sedation patches on her neck. She was being shipped somewhere. Sorvan was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. "The pendant she is wearing. Do you know what it is?" "I have a guess." "Then you know what she is." "I know she is a child who was locked in a box. That is all I need to know right now." He looked at me differently then, like I had said something he had not expected, like he had been bracing for a different kind of conversation, one involving leverage and opportunity, and what she was worth, and instead, he had gotten something simpler. "I need to examine her," Sorvan said. "Physically, she may have injuries I cannot assess from observation, but she will not allow it unless you help me." So I helped. I held Athos in my lap while Sorvan worked. He moved slowly, narrating everything he did before he did it, giving her time to accept each step. I talked to her while he scanned her. I did not say anything meaningful. I just talked. About the ship. About the stars. About a dog I had owned as a kid named Biscuit, who used to steal socks off the laundry line. She did not understand the words, but she watched my face while I spoke, and her skin stayed that pale lilac, and she let Sorvan do his work. The examination took an hour. When it was done, Sorvan sat back and folded his hands again. His expression had changed. The professional calm was still there, but beneath it, I could see something that looked a lot like grief. "She is malnourished," he said. "Dehydrated. There are bruises consistent with rough handling, though nothing is broken. The sedation compounds in her system are clearing, but they were administered repeatedly over what I estimate to be several weeks. Whoever had her before you was keeping her unconscious for transport. Several weeks. She had been in that crate, or one like it, for weeks. There is something else," Sorvan continued. He was choosing his words carefully now, like he was walking through a minefield. "I ran her biomarkers against the Velari diplomatic database. Her genetic signature matches the imperial bloodline, not a branch family, not a distant relation. She carries the primary markers of the ruling house." He paused. "She is the princess, the last one." The words hung in the air between us. I looked down at Ethos. She had fallen asleep against my chest, one small hand still gripping the fabric of my shirt. The pendant glowed softly against her collarbone, pulsing in time with her breathing. "There is something else you need to know," Sorvan said. "Something about what happened on Corvan. When you fought for her." "What about it?" "You bled for her. He pointed to my bandaged arm. In the Velari tradition, when a child of the imperial bloodline is in mortal danger, the first being who sheds blood in her defense triggers an ancient protocol. It is called the Rite of the Sworn Shield. It is not symbolic. It is biological and spiritual, encoded into the Velari genetic structure at a level that predates their recorded history. I stared at him. I do not know what that means. It means she chose you. The moment she took your hand in that cargo bay, she felt your willingness to fight, to bleed, to die. The rite activated. In the eyes of Velari law, above any coup, above any government, above any military authority, you are her guardian. Her what? Her sworn shield. Her protector. Not a bodyguard. Not a temporary arrangement. A sacred bond that supersedes every other authority in Velari civilization. Generals cannot overrule you. Councils cannot dismiss you. By the oldest law of her people, you stand above everyone except the child herself. I sat there with a sleeping alien princess in my arms, and a Dreth doctor, telling me that I had accidentally become the most important person in an empire I had never visited. And I felt something inside me crack open and fill with a cold, clear terror. I am a cargo hauler, I said. I have a criminal record. I drink too much. I have not spoken to my family in 4 years. I am the last person in this galaxy who should be responsible for a child. Sorvan looked at me with those amber eyes, and for the first time, the corner of his mouth moved in something that was almost a smile. And yet, here you are. I looked down at Ethis. She was still asleep. Her breathing was slow and steady, and her grip on my shirt had not loosened even in sleep. Her skin was the softest shade of violet I had seen yet, and the bioluminescent lines on her cheeks had dimmed to a faint, peaceful glow. I had opened a crate. I had seen a child. I had fought for her, without thinking about it, without calculating the odds, without considering what it would cost. And in doing so, I had triggered something I could not undo. A bond, a duty, a promise written in blood that I had not known I was making. Okay, I said. Not because I was ready, not because I was qualified, because she was sleeping in my arms, and I could feel her heartbeat against my ribs, and that was all the argument I needed. Sorvan arranged quarters for us in the station's residential wing, a small room with 2 bunks, a washroom, and a window that looked out at the dead moon. I put Athis in one of the bunks and covered her with a thermal blanket. She stirred but did not wake. I sat on the edge of the other bunk and let Sorvan treat my arm properly, stitching the wound closed and applying a regenerative patch that itched like fire. She needs food, I said. She would not eat standard rations. Velari physiology requires specific nutrients. I will prepare something suitable. He left. I sat in the dark room and watched Athis sleep. Her pendant pulsed gently in the dimness, a small beacon of light in a galaxy that had tried to snuff her out. I was still sitting there when the door chimed. It was not Sorvan. The woman standing in the doorway was Velari, tall, slender, with the same pale violet skin and silver eyes as Athis, but hers were hard. She wore civilian clothing, refugee garments provided by the station, but the way she stood was military, rigid, controlled. Every line of her body said professional. Cade Morrow, she said. It was not a question. I stood up slowly, putting myself between her and the bunk where Ethis slept. Who are you? My name does not matter. I represent the Velari Transitional Authority. She looked past me at the sleeping child. The individual you are harboring is a ward of the state. She is to be transferred to the authority's custody for her own safety and well-being. Her well-being. Right. That must be why she was in a livestock crate with sedation patches on her neck. The woman's expression did not change. The circumstances of her transit were regrettable but necessary. The outer territories are dangerous, as you clearly understand. We were arranging safe passage when you intervened. Safe passage to where? A shallow grave? Something flickered behind her eyes. Anger, maybe, or frustration at dealing with a human who would not take the hint. She reached into her jacket and produced a data chip. This contains enough credits to purchase a new ship, retire your debts, and live comfortably on any colony world of your choosing. Take it. Walk away. Forget the girl. The authority will handle this matter with the discretion it requires. I looked at the chip. Then I looked at her. Let me tell you something about humans, I said. We are not smart. We are not fast. We are not elegant. But we are very, very good at one thing, and that is refusing to do what we are told when it means hurting a kid. You are making a mistake. I have heard that before. She stared at me for 3 long seconds. Then she turned and walked away without another word. I sealed the door, locked it, and activated the internal security monitor. Then I sat back down next to Ethos and stayed awake. Something was wrong. The woman had found us too quickly. She had known my name. She had known our location on the station, which meant either Palak's refuge was not as neutral as I thought, or the coup had operatives embedded in every port and station across the sector. The attack came 6 hours later. I was standing at the window, watching the dead moon hang in the viewport, when the station shuddered. A deep, structural tremor that I felt through the floor and up into my knees. Then the alarms started. Not medical alarms, not fire alarms, breach alarms. The kind that meant someone was cutting through the hull. I scooped Athos out of the bunk. She woke instantly, her eyes going wide, her skin darkening to indigo. She grabbed my neck and held on. I grabbed the sidearm I had taken from one of Fell's men back on Corvin and ran. The station corridors were chaos. Medical staff running for shelter points, patients being evacuated on gurneys. Security teams moving toward the docking ring with weapons drawn. Through the transparency panels, I could see 3 Valari assault shuttles clamped to the station's outer hull like parasites, their breech tubes already punched through. Sorvan found me at the junction of the medical wing and the central corridor. He was carrying a plasma cutter, which was not a weapon, but would serve as one. They breached the docking ring, he said. Valari soldiers, at least 30. 30, I repeated, against a station security force of maybe 12. I have sealed the medical wing. It will buy us time. Not much. I need to get her to my ship. Your ship is in the docking ring. They will have seized it already. Of course they had, because nothing about this situation was going to be easy. We fell back to the medical wing and barricaded the main corridor. Sorvan, 3 station security guards, 2 medics who could hold a weapon, and me, against 30 Valari soldiers who had been trained to subjugate worlds. The math was not encouraging. They came through the barricade 4 minutes after we set it up. The Valari moved like water, fast and fluid, their weapons firing with a precision that made the security guards look like amateurs. The first guard went down in the opening seconds. The second took a hit to the shoulder and collapsed behind an overturned gurney. I fired back, using the corridor walls for cover, and dropped 2 Valari soldiers with shots that surprised me as much as them. Humans are not elegant fighters. We do not flow, or dance, or glide. We crouch behind cover, we grit our teeth, and we shoot at anything that moves. And in a narrow corridor with limited sight lines, that ugly, brutal approach worked better than elegance. But they kept coming. A grenade bounced around the corner, and I barely got behind a blast door before it went off, the concussion rattling my teeth and sending a shower of debris across the corridor. Sorvan fired his plasma cutter through the smoke, the superheated beam cutting through a support column and collapsing a section of the ceiling onto 2 advancing soldiers. The remaining security guard fought with a steady calm that told me he had done this before, picking his shots, conserving his ammunition, holding the line. We were losing. Slowly, methodically, step by step, we were being pushed back. There were too many of them, and not enough of us, and the Valari soldiers fought with a cold efficiency that left no room for hope. Then Athos did something extraordinary. She had been clinging to my back throughout the fight, her face pressed between my shoulder blades, her hands gripping my shirt. But when a blast punched through the wall beside us and I staggered, she unwrapped herself from me and stood up. She was tiny, a child standing in a corridor full of smoke and sparks, and the sound of weapons fire. But she stood, and she reached up and touched her pendant. Light exploded through the corridor, not white, not blue, gold. Pure, radiant gold that filled every corner and washed over every surface like liquid sunrise. It poured from her pendant, from the lines on her face, from her hands and her eyes, and every pore of her skin. Every Valari soldier in the corridor stopped. Not hesitated. Stopped. Completely. Totally. As if someone had hit a switch inside each of them. They stood frozen, weapons half raised, eyes wide, staring at the child who burned with the light of their oldest dynasty. Ethis spoke. Her voice was small, but it carried through the silence with a clarity that had nothing to do with volume. She spoke in Velari, and I did not understand the words, but I understood the tone. It was a command, not angry, not desperate, commanding, the voice of someone who had every right to be obeyed. Some of the soldiers lowered their weapons. Others went to their knees. Not all of them, but enough. Enough to break the formation, to create confusion, to shatter the certainty that had been driving them forward. It bought us time, maybe 40 seconds, maybe a minute, but in combat, a minute is a lifetime. I grabbed Athis, scooped her off the floor, and ran. Sorvan covered our retreat, firing the plasma cutter in wide sweeps that kept the recovering soldiers back. The surviving security guard held the corridor junction long enough for us to reach the emergency docking port on the far side of the medical wing, a maintenance hatch used for supply deliveries that connected to a small external berth. My ship was in the main docking ring, seized, gone. But Sorvan had thought ahead. A mending order supply shuttle sat in the maintenance berth, fueled and ready. It was small, unarmed, and had the acceleration profile of a drunk turtle, but it would fly. I strapped Athis into the passenger seat. Sorvan climbed in beside us, bleeding from a cut on his forearm, his bark-textured skin scorched from plasma blowback. I launched the shuttle before the breech doors were fully open, scraping paint off both sides, and pushed into open space. Behind us, Palak's refuge was burning. Emergency venting from 3 hull breaches created plumes of crystallized atmosphere that caught the moonlight and scattered it into rainbows. Assault shuttles peeled away from the station and turned toward us. I pushed the shuttle's engines to maximum and prayed. We hit faster than light 30 seconds before the first pursuit shuttle reached weapons range. The stars bent, the light shifted, and Palak's refuge disappeared behind us like a bad dream. In the passenger seat, Athis was unconscious. The effort of whatever she had done with the pendant had drained her completely. Her skin was nearly translucent, the bioluminescent lines dim and flickering. She looked fragile, breakable, like holding her too tightly might shatter her. Sorvan checked her vitals and said she would recover. She needed rest, food, and time. "Where are we going?" I asked. Sorvan was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled up the shuttle's communication array and began composing a coded transmission on a frequency I had never seen before. "There are still those loyal to the true bloodline," he said. "A fleet, scattered, hunted, but alive. They have been searching for her since the coup." "How do you know this?" He looked at me with those amber eyes. "Because I am one of them." The transmission went out. Short, encrypted, aimed at a relay point somewhere in deep space. Sorvan typed 12 words and sent them into the void. "The princess lives. She has chosen a guardian. He is human." I sat in the pilot seat of a stolen supply shuttle, battered and bleeding, and holding the fate of an empire in my arms, and I waited for an answer from the dark. The answer came 14 hours later, in the form of 7 warships dropping out of faster-than-light travel, in a formation so precise it looked like a single movement. They were Velari vessels, but different from the ones that had chased us through the asteroid belt. These were older, scarred, their hulls showing the damage of months spent running and hiding. Battle repairs covered their surfaces like patchwork, welded plates, and improvised armor that spoke of a fleet that had been fighting long before I entered the picture. But they were armed, and they were organized, and they moved with the coordinated purpose of a military force that still believed in something. The lead ship hailed us. Sorvan answered, exchanging authentication codes that took 3 full minutes to complete. When they were satisfied, the flagship opened its docking bay and swallowed our shuttle like a whale swallowing a minnow. The bay was immense. Velari fighters lined the walls in neat rows, their pilots standing beside them, watching us land with expressions I could not read. Everything was clean, disciplined, ordered. Even in exile, even running for their lives, the Velari maintained a standard that made my cargo hauler existence feel like living in a dumpster. The docking ramp opened, and I stepped out carrying Athos, who was awake but weak, her head resting on my shoulder. Sorvan walked beside me, and together we faced the delegation that was waiting. At their head stood a woman who made every other Velari I had encountered look small. She was tall, even by their standards, with skin the color of deep amethyst and eyes that burned like polished steel. She wore armor, real combat armor, scarred and dented from use. Her hair was silver white and cropped close to her skull, and across her left cheek, a network of fine scars told the story of a wound that should have killed her. Admiral Thyra Kovan, commander of the Velari Loyalist Remnant, the last line of defense for a fallen dynasty. She looked at me the way a surgeon looks at an infection. This is the Guardian. It was not a question. It was an accusation. Admiral, Sorvan began. A human, she said the word like it tasted bad. Her eyes swept over me, cataloging every detail. The blood-stained bandage on my arm, the bruises, the torn clothing, the utter lack of anything that could be confused with military bearing. The right of the sworn shield, the most sacred bond in our civilization. And it chose a human cargo hauler. The right does not choose based on species, Sorvan said carefully. The right has never been tested on a species that has existed for less than a blink of galactic time. She turned those steel eyes back to me. How long has your kind been capable of faster-than-light travel? 40 years? 50? My people built our first starships before your species learned to cultivate grain. I met her stare. I was tired, in pain, and in no mood for a lecture on evolutionary timelines. Your people also just lost their empire to a coup, I said, so maybe the resume is not as impressive as it sounds. The silence that followed was the kind that precedes either violence or respect. Every Velari in the bay tensed. Sorvan closed his eyes in a way that suggested he was preparing for the worst. Admiral Kovan stared at me for 5 long seconds. Then something shifted behind her eyes. Not warmth, not approval, but a grudging acknowledgement that I was not going to bow, and that she was going to have to deal with me as I was. The right requires validation, she said. You must undergo the trial of the Guardian. 3 tests. If you pass, the right is confirmed, and your authority is recognized. If you fail, the bond is declared false, and the child will be placed under military protection. And if I refuse, then you are a kidnapper, and I will space you. Ethis stirred against my shoulder. She lifted her head and looked at Koavan, and something passed between them, a recognition. The Admiral's expression changed, softening for just a fraction of a second, and I saw the grief she was carrying. She had served the old Empress. She had watched the Empire fall, and now she was looking at the last remnant of everything she had sworn to protect, clinging to a human who smelled like engine grease and dried blood. I will take the trial, I said. They gave me 2 hours to rest and eat before the first test. 2 hours in a sparse cabin with a bunk and a washroom and nothing else. Athos stayed with me. They tried to take her to a separate room, more comfortable, better suited for a child. She refused. She planted herself next to my bunk and did not move, and when a Velari aide reached for her hand, she pulled away and pressed closer to me. So she stayed. I sat on the bunk and she sat beside me, and we shared a meal of Velari nutrient paste that tasted like sweetened chalk. She ate it readily, the first real food she had consumed since I found her. The color of her skin brightened as she ate, shifting from pale violet to something warmer, richer, like the inside of an orchid. She was recovering. Cade, she said, pointing at me. Then she pointed at herself. Athos. Then she pointed at the door, at the ship beyond it, at everything that was waiting for us, and she said a word in Velari that I did not understand, but that sounded like a question. I do not know, I told her, but I am not going anywhere. She studied my face, then she nodded, as if confirming something to herself, and leaned against my side and closed her eyes. The first trial was endurance. They took me to a compartment deep in the flagship's interior, empty except for a chair and a neural interface device that looked like a crown made of needles. Koavan was there, along with 12 Velari observers in formal robes. The trial was witnessed, official, recorded. The device will access your neural pathways and amplify your pain response, Koavan explained. It will find the worst pain you have ever experienced and multiply it. Your task is simple. Remain standing. I sat in the chair. They placed the device on my head, and then the world turned inside out. Pain is something humans have a complicated relationship with. We fear it, avoid it, medicate against it, but we also endure it in ways that other species find baffling. We run marathons on broken bones. We give birth and go back to work. We get hit by cars and walk away, and tell the story at parties. Pain is not our enemy. It is our oldest companion. The device found the worst moment of my life, not a physical injury. The day I got the transmission, telling me my brother had died on a colony world I could not even name, killed in a mining accident 3 weeks before I was supposed to visit. The pain of that loss, amplified, compressed, and fed back into my nervous system at maximum intensity. I screamed. I will not pretend otherwise. The sound that came out of me was not brave. It was animal. My knees buckled. My vision went white. Blood ran from my nose and dripped onto the floor. Every nerve in my body burned with a grief so intense, it felt like being unmade. But I stood. I stood because somewhere on this ship, a little girl was waiting for me to come back. And if I fell, if I failed, she would be alone again. Put in someone else's care, someone else's custody. She had chosen me. She had grabbed my hand in a cargo hold and decided that I was worth trusting. I was not going to prove her wrong. The trial lasted 4 minutes. It felt like 4 years. When the device was removed, I was shaking so hard I could barely stay upright. My face was wet. My hands were clenched into fists at my sides, knuckles white. But I was standing. Koevon watched me with an expression I could not read. The observers were silent. The second trial was prioritization. They put me in a simulation chamber, full sensory immersion. The scenario was simple. A collapsing structure with 2 paths, one leading to safety, one leading to a trapped child. The child was Ethis, or a simulation of her, rendered with enough accuracy that my chest hurt when I saw her. The structure was coming down. I had seconds to choose, save myself or save her. I did not hesitate, not for a heartbeat, not for a fraction of a second. I went for her. The ceiling came down, and the simulation ended, and I was standing in the chamber, holding empty air where a child had been. The observers murmured among themselves. Koevon's expression changed again, another fractional shift that I was learning to read. This time it was surprise. Not that I had chosen the child, that I had not even considered the alternative. The third trial was clarity. This one was not a simulation. 3 Velari elite guards stood across from me in a combat arena. They wore light armor and carried training weapons that were set to non-lethal, but still hit hard enough to break bones. The rules were simple. Fight until the trial was concluded. No time limit, no point system, just combat. They came at me fast. The Velari are taller than humans, longer-limbed, with reflexes that make ours look sluggish. The first guard closed the distance before I could set my feet and landed a strike to my ribs that sent a shock of pain through my already damaged side. The second swept my legs and dropped me to the floor. The third pinned me with a weapon pressed against my chest. I broke the pin by driving my forehead into the third guard's chin. It was ugly. It was graceless. It was the kind of move that makes martial artists wince and barroom brawlers cheer. But it worked. The guard staggered, and I rolled to my feet, blood running from a cut on my scalp. The fight was brutally one-sided. They were better trained, faster, and they worked together, with a coordination that came from years of drilling. I was slower, shorter, and fighting with a broken rib and more injuries than I could count. They hit me. They put me down, again and again. I got up every time. Not because I was tough, not because I had something to prove, because every time I hit the floor, I thought about Ethis, about the cargo crate, about the sedation patches, about the sound she made when she grabbed my hand, that small, desperate sound of someone choosing to trust one more time. I was not fighting to win. I was fighting to survive, to last, to get back to her. That was the point of the trial. Not victory, purpose. The fourth time I dragged myself off the floor, bleeding from my scalp and my mouth and a dozen other places, the guards looked at Koevon. She raised one hand. They stepped back. The arena was silent. Koevan walked toward me. She stopped 2 paces away and looked at me for a long time. Her eyes searched mine the way Ethis had searched them in the cargo hold, looking for something specific, something that could not be faked. Then Admiral Thyra Koevan, commander of the Valery Loyalist Remnant, the most decorated warrior of a civilization that had existed for 10,000 years, went to one knee. Behind her, every Valari in the arena followed. 12 observers, 3 guards, a dozen officers and crew members who had gathered to watch. They knelt in unison, a wave of movement that rippled outward like a stone dropped in still water. "The rite is confirmed," Koevan said. "The Guardian stands." I wanted to say something meaningful, something worthy of the moment. Instead, the arena door opened, and Aethys came running in, small and fast, her skin blazing with a color I had never seen before. She slammed into my legs and wrapped her arms around me and pressed her face against my stomach, and the impact nearly knocked me down because I had nothing left. But I stayed on my feet because she needed me standing. Sorvan found me later, after the medics had patched me up again and Ethys had finally fallen asleep in my arms in the cabin they had assigned us. He told me about the color, the golden glow that had radiated from her during the fight and after, when she held on to me. In Valari bioluminescent language, gold means safe, he said. It is the rarest display. Valari children show it only in the presence of someone they trust completely, someone who makes them feel absolutely secure. He paused. She has never shown it to anyone before. Not to her nurses, not to her tutors, not to any Valari, only to you. I looked down at her sleeping face. She was glowing softly, that warm gold light pulsing gently with each breath, and for the first time since I had opened that cargo crate, I felt something that was not fear or anger or adrenaline. I felt like maybe, despite everything, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The fleet mobilized that night. 7 warships, 3,000 soldiers, 1 admiral with vengeance in her eyes, and a battle plan to take back a homeworld. They were going to Valara. They were going to end the coup, and they were going to put a child on a throne. Aethys woke up when the fleet began to move. She felt the vibration through the hull, the deep hum of engines powering up for a long-range jump. She looked at me with those silver eyes, and then she spoke. Not in Valari, in Galactic Common. 3 words, carefully shaped, deliberately chosen. Cade, come with. It was not a command, it was a request. A child asking the person she trusted most to stay with her for what came next. I held her a little tighter and felt her heartbeat against my ribs, fast and light like wings. I am not going anywhere, I said. The Valari homeworld appeared through the viewport like a jewel wrapped in clouds of violet and silver. Valara. I had seen images of it in the diplomatic databases, but images did not capture what it felt like to look at a world that old. It glowed, not like a star, but like something living, something aware. The atmosphere shimmered with a bioluminescent haze that mirrored the light I had seen in Aethys, as if the planet itself was made of the same energy that flowed through her veins. It was beautiful, and it was occupied by people who wanted her dead. Admiral Koevan briefed the fleet in the flagship's war room, a cavernous space filled with holographic displays and the quiet tension of soldiers who knew they were outnumbered. The coup forces controlled the orbital defense grid, 3 ground-based military installations, and the Imperial Citadel at the heart of the capital city. Their fleet numbered 21 warships. We had 7. The mathematics are unfavorable, Koevan said, which was Valari, for we are probably going to die. But there was a way. The Citadel contained the Crown Resonance, a bio-locked command system hardwired into the planet's defense network. It responded only to the true Imperial bloodline. If Aethys could reach the throne chamber and activate it, every coup-controlled weapons system would recognize her authority and shut down. The orbital grid, the ground installations, the warships, all of it. The catch was getting her there. Koevan's plan was layered. The fleet would engage the coup's warships in orbit, drawing their attention and their firepower. Under cover of the battle, a single assault transport would slip through the orbital defenses and land near the capital. A strike team would escort Aethys through the city to the Citadel. Cade would be at her side. "You are the Guardian," Coevan said, looking at me with an expression that had evolved from contempt to something closer to reluctant trust. "Your place is with her. Whatever happens to the rest of us, your only objective is to get her to the throne chamber." I nodded. There was nothing else to say. The fleet jumped to Velara at dawn, local time. We came out of faster-than-light travel in a staggered formation, 7 ships emerging from bent space like fists punching through a wall. The coup fleet was waiting. 21 warships arrayed in a defensive perimeter around the planet, their weapons already hot. The battle began immediately. I was not on the bridge. I was in the assault transport, strapped into a seat beside Aethys, watching the orbital fight through a monitor that reduced the largest naval engagement I had ever witnessed to a pattern of colored dots and trajectory lines. Coevan's flagship traded fire with 3 coup destroyers simultaneously, her shields flaring with each impact, her weapons cutting precise lines through the void. 2 loyalist cruisers flanked a coup battleship and concentrated their fire on its engine section until it broke apart in a bloom of light and debris. The coup fought back hard. A loyalist frigate took a direct hit to its reactor and vanished in a flash that left an afterimage on my retinas. Another lost shields and began venting atmosphere, its crew scrambling for escape pods. But Coevan had been fighting this enemy for 8 months. She knew their tactics, their formations, their commanders' tendencies. She pulled the coup fleet out of position, drew them away from the orbital grid, and for 90 seconds, there was a gap in the defensive perimeter. Our transport dove through it. The descent was controlled chaos. Anti-orbital batteries on the surface tracked us, and the pilot threw the transport through evasive maneuvers that slammed me against my harness and made Aethys cry out. Plasma bolts streaked past the viewport, close enough to turn the air inside the cockpit orange. The transport shuddered as something grazed our port side, tearing away a section of hull plating that spun off into the atmosphere. We hit the ground hard in a park 2 kilometers from the Citadel. The landing struts buckled on impact, and the transport slid across manicured alien grass and came to rest against a row of trees that looked like they were made of crystal. Beautiful, fragile. They shattered when the hull hit them. The ramp dropped and the strike team deployed. 12 Velari loyalist soldiers, armed and armored, moving with the fluid efficiency I had come to associate with their species. They formed a perimeter around the transport and waited for me. I unstrapped Aethys and carried her down the ramp. She was alert, her eyes wide, her skin cycling between indigo and violet, as fear and determination warred inside her. She was wearing light body armor that the Loyalists had modified for her size, and her pendant hung over the chest plate, glowing steadily. 2 kilometers, the strike team leader, a compact Velari officer named Lieutenant Orin, told me. Through the commercial district, across the central plaza, and into the Citadel through the eastern gate. Expect resistance. We moved fast. The capital city was eerily quiet, its streets empty, its buildings dark. The civilian population had gone underground. They could feel it. Everyone on this planet could feel it. Something was about to change, and the smart move was to stay out of the way until it did. We made it 600 meters before we hit the first patrol. A squad of coup soldiers rounded a corner ahead of us, 10 of them in heavy armor, with weapons that made ours look like toys. They saw us at the same moment we saw them, and the street erupted. The Loyalists fought beautifully. There is no other word for it. They moved in pairs, covering each other, advancing through fire with a discipline that turned combat into choreography. But the coup soldiers were well trained too, and they had reinforcements. A second squad appeared behind us, boxing us in. I pulled Aethys behind a stone pillar and covered her with my body. Weapons fire scorched the pillar's surface, sending chips of alien stone pinging off my helmet. I returned fire with the sidearm the Loyalists had given me, dropping a coup soldier who was flanking our position. Then another, then a third. The Velari around me noticed, not what I hit, but how I fought. There was no grace in it, no artistry. I crouched behind cover, identified the most immediate threat, and shot it. Then I moved, found new cover, and did it again. Efficient. Brutal. Ugly. The Velari fight like dancers. Humans fight like machines. And in a street fight with no room for elegance, the machine approach worked. We broke through the first engagement in 4 minutes, lost 2 soldiers doing it. Oren took a hit to the arm that he ignored, with a stoicism that impressed even me. We kept moving, faster now, aware that every second we spent in the streets was a second the coup had to reinforce the citadel. The central plaza was a killing field, open ground, 500 meters across, with the citadel rising on the far side like a mountain of crystal and metal. Its walls glowed with the same bioluminescent energy that flowed through Athos, but darker, corrupted, as if the building itself was sick. Coup forces held the plaza. 2 armored vehicles, a squad of heavy infantry, and automated defense turrets that swept the open ground with targeting lasers. There was no way across without taking casualties. Oren looked at me. I looked at the citadel. "We go through the underground," I said. "Maintenance tunnels. Every building this old has them." Oren shook his head. "The tunnels are sealed. The coup locked them down in the first week. Then we unseal them." It took 4 minutes and a plasma cutter borrowed from a loyalist engineer. The maintenance access point was hidden behind a commercial building on the plaza's edge, sealed with a magnetic lock that the plasma cutter turned into slag. The tunnel below was narrow, dark, and ran directly beneath the plaza to the citadel's eastern foundation. We moved through the tunnels in single file, Ethos on my back, her arms tight around my neck. The space was claustrophobic, the ceiling low enough that I had to crouch, and the air smelled like ozone and something organic that I did not want to identify. But it was clear, no defenders, no traps. The coup had sealed the tunnels and forgotten about them, because no one expected an assault force to come from below. We emerged inside the citadel's lower level, a cavernous space filled with machinery and humming conduits that carried the building's bioluminescent energy system. From here, the throne chamber was 4 levels up, accessible by a central stairway that spiraled through the heart of the building. We made it 2 levels before they found us. The ambush was precise and devastating. Coup soldiers poured from side corridors on the 3rd level, cutting our force in half. Oren and 4 soldiers were separated from us, pinned down behind structural pillars on the far side of the stairway. I had Ethos, Sorvan, who had insisted on coming despite having no military training, and 3 loyalists who formed a defensive line at the stairway entrance. "Go!" Oren shouted from across the gap. "Get her to the chamber. We will hold them here." I went. Up the stairway, 3 loyalists ahead of me, Sorvan behind, Athos clinging to my back. We fought through 2 more squads on the 4th level, losing a loyalist at each engagement. By the time we reached the corridor leading to the throne chamber, it was me, Sorvan, 1 loyalist soldier, and Athos. And waiting at the end of the corridor, standing before the sealed doors of the throne chamber, was General Draven Sorath. He was the largest Velari I had ever seen. Where Koivan was tall and angular, Sorath was massive, built like a wall, with deep violet skin that was almost black, and eyes that glowed not silver, but deep crimson. He wore command armor, ornate and battle-scarred, and he held a weapon in each hand, a blade in one, and an energy pistol in the other. Behind him, 6 soldiers of his personal guard stood in formation. They were the elite, the best the coup had. Sorath looked at me, at Athos on my back, at the battered, bleeding, exhausted human who stood between him and the end of a dynasty. "You have come a long way for a dead cause," he said. His voice was deep, resonant, filling the corridor. "The old empire is finished. The bloodline is an artifact. Give me the child, and you can leave this world alive. I will even provide a ship. You can go back to your hauling routes and your quiet desperation, and pretend none of this happened." I set Athos down behind me. She gripped the back of my armor and held on. I could feel her shaking. "Every person who has tried to take her from me has made the same offer," I said. "Credits, a ship, a new life. Walk away and forget. It is a generous offer. It is the only offer you have, because you cannot take her while I am standing." Sorath studied me. Something moved behind those crimson eyes, not quite curiosity, more like the bemused interest of a predator encountering prey that did not know enough to run. "Then I will ensure you are no longer standing." He moved. Fast. Faster than anything that size should have been able to move. The blade came at me in a sweep that would have taken my head if I had not dropped flat. The energy pistol fired, and the shot passed through the space my chest had occupied a half-second earlier and blew a hole in the wall behind me. The loyalist soldier engaged the guard. Sorvan pulled Aethys back, shielding her with his body, and I fought Draven Sorath, the architect of a coup that had toppled 10,000 years of civilization, in a corridor of crystal and light. He was better than me, vastly. His blade work was precise and lethal, each strike aimed to kill, each movement flowing into the next with a fluidity that turned combat into art. He cut me twice in the first 10 seconds, once across the chest plate, where the blade scored deep grooves in the armor but did not penetrate, once across my left thigh, where it did. I fell, hit the floor, tasted blood, got up. He hit me with the flat of the blade, a contemptuous strike to the side of my head that made my vision swim. I staggered, caught the wall, stayed upright. He kicked me in the ribs, the broken one, and I felt something give inside my chest with a wet crunch. I went down on one knee. The world was getting dark around the edges. Got up. Sorath paused. For the first time, something other than confidence appeared in his expression. He looked at me, this bleeding, broken, stubborn human, and I saw confusion. "Why do you keep getting up?" he asked. It was a genuine question. He did not understand. "Because she is behind me," I said. I hit him. Not with skill, not with technique, with everything I had left, compressed into a single movement. My fist connected with the seam between his chest plate and his shoulder guard, driving into the joint with enough force to crack the armor and reach the flesh beneath. He grunted, the first sound of pain he had made, and his blade arm faltered. I did not stop. I hit him again, and again, closing the distance until we were chest to chest, inside the reach of his blade. I drove my knee into his thigh, my elbow into his throat, my forehead into his chin. Ugly, desperate, human. He threw me. Literally, physically hurled me across the corridor. I hit the far wall and felt something crack in my shoulder. I slid to the floor. The darkness was closing in. But Aethys was moving. While I had held Sorath's attention, Sorvan had guided her past the engagement, around the edges of the corridor, toward the throne chamber doors. The doors were sealed, but they responded to her. As she approached, the crystal surfaces began to glow, recognizing the bloodline, responding to the only authority they were programmed to obey. Sorath saw it. He turned, blade raised, moving to intercept. I got up one last time. I threw myself at him. No technique, no plan, just a body placed between a weapon and a child. His blade caught me across the side, a wound I felt but could not process, and I wrapped my arms around him and held on. He was stronger, massively so. He pried me loose and slammed me to the ground, but the seconds I had stolen were enough. Aethys placed her hands on the throne chamber doors. They opened. Light poured from inside. The same gold light that I had seen in her, amplified 1,000-fold, pouring through the corridor like a river of liquid sun. It washed over everything, every wall, every surface, every person. Sorath recoiled as if struck. Aethys walked into the throne chamber. She was small, so small, a child in a room built for emperors. The throne stood at the center, a structure of living crystal that pulsed with the planet's heartbeat. She walked toward it, her steps steady, her head up, her pendant blazing. She placed her hands on the throne. The world changed. The crown resonance activated, with a sound that was not a sound. It was a vibration, a frequency that passed through solid matter and empty space alike, spreading from the citadel outward, in an expanding sphere. I felt it in my bones, in my teeth, in the broken rib that suddenly hurt less as the vibration passed through it. In orbit, every Coup-U warship powered down. Weapons went silent, engines cut to standby. The orbital defense grid recognized new authorization codes and stood down. On the ground, every military installation controlled by the coup went dark. Automated turrets retracted, locked doors opened. Communications channels lit up with a single signal, broadcast on every frequency, in every language, reaching every corner of the planet and every ship in the system. The Empress has returned. Sorath fell to his knees. Not by choice. The resonance compelled it. The authority of the bloodline, encoded into the very biology of the Velari people, overrode his will and drove him down. His blade clattered to the floor. His crimson eyes were wide, not with fear, but with the shattering realization that everything he had built, everything he had seized, had just been undone by a child who weighed less than his armor. His guards knelt beside him. Around the citadel, through the city, across the planet, Velari soldiers dropped to their knees as the resonance washed over them. I lay on the corridor floor, bleeding from more wounds than I could count, watching through dimming eyes as the golden light filled the world. The pain was enormous, a symphony of damage that my body was cataloging with ruthless precision. I was fairly sure the wound on my side had nicked something important, because the floor beneath me was wet and warm. But Ethis was safe. She stood in the throne chamber, her hands on the throne, her skin blazing with golden light, and she was safe. That was all that mattered. That was the only thing that had ever mattered, from the moment I opened a cargo crate on Corvan Station and saw a child who needed someone to fight for her. Then she came back. She walked out of the throne chamber, still glowing, still shaking, and she walked past the kneeling soldiers, and past Sorvan, and past the debris and the damage and the blood, and she came to me. She knelt beside me on the corridor floor and put her small hands on my chest. I could feel the warmth of her glow through my shattered armor, soaking into my skin, into the wounds, into the places that hurt the worst. Then she spoke. Not in Velari, not in broken fragments. In clear, perfect galactic common, shaped with the precision of someone who had been listening carefully and learning quietly, building the words in secret until she had the right ones for the moment that mattered. This is my guardian. He stays. The loyalty soldiers who arrived in the minutes that followed found a scene they would talk about for generations. The coup general on his knees, the princess standing in golden light, and a human lying on the floor, broken and bleeding, with a 6-year-old girl holding his hand and refusing to let anyone move him until the medics arrived. They rebuilt the empire in the weeks that followed. Sorath and his lieutenants were tried and imprisoned. A regent council was established to govern until Aethys came of age. Koavan was appointed supreme military commander. Sorvan was given a position in the Royal Medical Corps. The Velari homeworld began to heal, and I was formally recognized as the Sworn Shield, the first non-Velari in 10,000 years of civilization to hold the title. It came with responsibilities I was still learning, protocols I barely understood, and a level of respect from the Velari people that made me deeply uncomfortable. Galactic Council diplomats arrived for the restoration ceremonies and were visibly stunned to find a human standing at the right hand of the throne. One of them, a Belari ambassador with 3 rows of teeth and an inflated sense of self-importance, approached Koavan during a formal reception and asked, with barely concealed disdain, how the Velari could allow an inferior species to hold such a sacred position. Koavan looked at him with those steel eyes and said, he bled for her before he knew her name. What have you done? The ambassador did not ask again. I did not make speeches. I did not seek power. I did not leverage my position, or build alliances, or play the political games that swirled around the recovering empire like vultures around a carcass. I did the only thing I had ever been qualified to do. I stood behind a small girl's chair, arms crossed, and watched the door. I had been a cargo hauler, a drifter, a man who had walked away from everything that mattered, and convinced himself that keeping his head down was a life. Then I opened a crate and found a child, and everything changed. Not because I was special, not because I was chosen, because I was there, and she needed someone, and I did not walk away. That was it. That was the whole story. A man who did not walk away. The council sessions ran late that night. Aethys sat through 3 hours of diplomatic negotiations, with a patience that belied her age, asking questions through her interpreter, pushing back on proposals she found inadequate, displaying a political instinct that suggested the imperial bloodline carried more than just bioluminescence. When the session ended, The dignitaries filed out, and the chamber emptied. Aethys sat in her chair, too small for the throne she would one day occupy, and stared at the star map on the far wall. The weight of an empire rested on shoulders that barely reached my chest. She reached back without looking. I took her hand. And we sat there together in the quiet chamber, a human and a Velari child, while the stars turned outside the viewport and the galaxy kept spinning, indifferent to the small miracle that had taken place inside a cargo crate on the worst station in known space. She was safe. I was staying, and that was enough.